For more than 6 decades, she has been inescapable, her voice threading through the fabric of French life like a melody you never quite forget. Tens of millions of people have sung along without ever knowing the full story. They saw the smile, the stage, the spotlight. What they didn't see was everything happening in the dark. At 79 years old, Sheila has finally decided to talk, and what she reveals will leave even her most devoted fans breathless. This is not the story you think you know. Her name is recognized across generations. From the suburban market stalls of Créteil to the grandest concert halls in France and beyond, she carved a path that no one could have predicted, and that she herself barely survived. Behind the dazzling performances and the iconic image lay a life marked by unimaginable grief, deliberate betrayal, and personal battles waged entirely out of the public eye. Today at 79, Sheila breaks her silence. The truths she shares are not comfortable ones. They will stun even the fans who believed they knew her best. This is the story of a market girl who became a pop sensation, a woman who was exploited at the height of her fame, and a mother who endured the unthinkable and kept singing anyway. From a candy stall in Créteil to the stages of France, this is her story. She came into the world on August 16, 1945 in Créteil, a modest town southeast of Paris, born Annie Chancel in a France still raw from the wounds of war. The country was rebuilding itself from rubble and loss, and so was her family. Solid in their values, humble in their means, they were the kind of people who kept going because stopping was never an option. Her father, André Chancel, made his living selling confectionery at open-air markets across the Parisian suburbs. Her mother, Micheline Gaultier, held the family together, supporting the business and raising their only daughter. From her very earliest memories, Annie's world was alive with color, sweetness, and noise. The crack of wooden stalls being assembled before dawn, the perfume of sugar in the air, the laughter of strangers becoming regulars. Her days were split between school and the family stand, at markets like those in Charenton and Saint-Maur. By the time she was 14, she was already a full participant in her parents' rounds, learning not just the value of hard work, but the art of connecting with people. She watched faces, read moods, understood instinctively how to make someone feel welcome. It was a skill that would serve her far beyond the marketplace. But what happened next would change everything. Even in that ordinary setting, Annie could not go unnoticed. Customers were enchanted. Whether she was restocking the sweets or counting change, she hummed, she sang, she filled whatever space she occupied with melody. The regulars gave her a nickname, La Radio. It was affectionate, but it also pointed toward something real. Music wasn't something Annie did. It was something Annie was. At age 8, that instinct took on structure. She began studying piano and solfège, demonstrating a discipline that surprised everyone around her. She had flirted with other dreams. A life in the circus, perhaps, inspired by the acrobats she watched wide-eyed at local fairs. But music quietly consumed everything else. Encouraged by the visible joy her voice gave to others, she trained seriously, fitting her lessons between household duties and her duties at the market stand. She attended the communal school on Rue de Patillo in Paris, where she was a diligent student, though far more captivated by music and performance than by mathematics or geography. As the 1950s drew to a close and adolescence sharpened her sense of the world, her musical appetite expanded dramatically. Rock and roll had arrived in France, and the yay-yay wave was cresting. She absorbed everything: the sounds of Elvis Presley, the charisma of Johnny Hallyday, and she dreamed of trading the market rounds for a proper stage. By 1960, at 15 years old, that dream had become impatient. She began joining amateur rock groups, including a brief stint with a band called the Guitar Brothers. These early experiences were local and modest, but they were formative. She performed at youth gatherings, community celebrations, town fetes, each performance sharpening her stage instincts, each audience teaching her something new about how to hold a room. Then came the day that would redirect everything, September 14, 1962. Barely 17, Annie walked into an audition held in a converted cinema in one of Paris's arrondissements, connected to the opportunity through musicians she had met along the way. Among the small audience that afternoon was Claude Carrère, a sharp-eyed producer who understood commercial potential the way a jeweler understands raw stone. He saw it immediately. The girlish charisma, the clean, unaffected voice, the natural ease in front of strangers. Carrère did not wait. The very next day, over coffee in a Parisian cafe, he sat down with Annie's parents and convinced them to sign a 10-year exclusive contract. For Annie, it felt like a door opening onto something magical, a future she had only dared imagine while stacking bonbon jars at the family stand. For Carrère, it was the beginning of something very carefully calculated. What no one realized at the time was how total that calculation would prove to be. Annie Chancel, the market girl, was rebranded. She became Sheila, a name borrowed from a Tommy Rowe hit, and with it came an entirely constructed image. The wholesome schoolgirl in a white blouse and plaid skirt, braids neat against her shoulders, expression innocent and untroubled. It was a persona engineered to appeal to the widest possible audience, and it worked, brilliantly and at great personal cost. Behind the candid image lay a grueling regime of studio sessions, rehearsals, and promotional appearances that allowed almost no room for rest or personal choice. In November 1962, her debut single Sheila was released, but it was the 1963 anthem L'école est finie that sent her into the stratosphere. The song spoke directly to French youth hungry for lightness and modernity, and Sheila became the voice of a generation. The ascent was extraordinary. The price was already being paid. The climb was steep and fast, and there was no time to breathe. Studio recordings took priority over live performance. Carrère kept her close to the microphone and away from the stage, optimizing her output like a factory running at full capacity. At just 18 years old during a concert in Rouen, her body gave out entirely. She collapsed on stage from exhaustion, a stark warning about the unsustainable pace that had been imposed upon her. She weighed barely 40 kilograms when she was carried to hospital. The young woman behind the star was being consumed by the demands placed on her. Behind closed doors, the story looked very different. Later, Sheila would describe this period with painful clarity, calling herself a golden goose, treated more as a product than as an artist by those who controlled her career. She sang when she was told to sing, recorded what she was told to record, smiled for every camera placed in front of her. The joy the audience saw was real, but it existed alongside something the audience was never allowed to see. On the surface, it looked like success. Underneath, something was breaking. Yet the music endured. Album after album, her voice carried something genuine, a warmth that no commercial calculation could manufacture. She connected with audiences across France and beyond, selling millions of records, appearing on television, headlining concerts that drew crowds that seemed impossible for a girl who had been selling candy just a few years before. The trajectory was astonishing, but at the center of it all, Annie Chancel was quietly disappearing inside the image of Sheila. As her career soared, a malicious rumor surfaced, and it would haunt her for nearly half a century. It began in 1964, when Sheila was 18 years old. After collapsing from anemia, she underwent hormonal treatment that altered her voice slightly. The press, hungry for sensation and fed by whispers that allegedly came from within her own professional circle, seized on the change. Within weeks, tabloids like France Dimanche were circulating the claim that Sheila was in fact a man. The damage was swift and merciless. Still a teenager, she became the target of mockery and suspicion on a national scale. She remembered the horror of those weeks, shutting herself inside with her parents, in tears, trying to understand how to face a world that seemed to take pleasure in destroying her. There was no mechanism to fight back effectively. The story had already spread beyond reach. The truth, when it finally came out, was far darker than anyone expected. Not in the details of the rumor itself, but in the deliberate cruelty that perpetuated it. The pressure never fully relented. Even after her marriage to fellow singer Ringo in 1973, and the birth of their son Ludovic 2 years later, the accusations continued. Her pregnancy was said by some to have been staged. The child, some claimed, had been adopted under false pretenses. Every milestone of her personal life was twisted into fresh ammunition for people who seemed determined to unmake her. She fought back as best she could. Public appearances, legal action, unwavering professionalism. But the wounds from those lies ran deep. In her most honest moments, she acknowledged they had left marks that never fully healed. What started out as what seemed like a joke pursued me for 40 years, she said in a television interview, the weight of that duration audible in every syllable. Her marriage to Ringo, born Gilles Ballet, on February 13, 1973, was presented to the public as a fairy tale. Two of France's most beloved pop stars together. The ceremony was supposed to be civil and intimate, held at the town hall of Paris's 13th arrondissement. But Claude Carrère leaked the details to the press to maximize publicity for his artist. What resulted was chaos. Nearly 10,000 fans descended on the town hall, overwhelming the space, forcing the doors, transforming the event into something close to a riot. Officials struggled to maintain any semblance of order while the crowd pushed to see the celebrated couple. The mayor reportedly had to beg for silence just to complete the ceremony, and then, without warning, everything collapsed. The religious ceremony at Notre Dame de la Gare was no different. Fans broke through again, pulling flowers from her hair in a frenzy that could not be controlled. What should have been the most beautiful day of her life became a spectacle that left her shaken in disillusion. In the early months of the marriage, Sheila admitted she had been drawn to Ringo's appearance. Tall, dark-haired, with a brooding magnetism that matched her idea of the ideal man. I paid more attention to his looks than to his mind, she would confess in a later interview, recalling her younger self with something between tenderness and regret. As months became years, it became clear that the emotional foundation between them was not sufficient to hold anything together. When Ludovic was born, the cracks in the marriage had already become impossible to ignore. She later revealed that she had discovered Ringo's infidelity during her pregnancy, a betrayal that left her isolated precisely when she had hoped to be building something solid. The arrival of their son, rather than drawing his parents closer, only made more visible how hollow the partnership had become. There was a public image of a family and nothing much behind it. Sheila did everything she could to give Ludovic a normal life. She negotiated visitation rights, encouraged Ringo to be present, tried to build something functional from the ruins of the marriage. But Ringo, as she recounted with pained frustration, rarely made the effort. Ludovic saw his father only a handful of times throughout his brief life. Too few occasions to form real memories of shared holidays, of ordinary moments, of a father who showed up. Sheila raised him alone. She took on both roles, trying to be everything to a boy who, in the public eye, was supposed to belong to a storybook family that had never actually existed. The official separation came in 1979, when the divorce was finalized. There was no grand public scandal beyond what years of slow estrangement had already generated. Sheila spoke of it without bitterness. "I have never seen my husband since 1979. I feel neither anger nor resentment. I simply have nothing left to say to him." But the emotional aftermath persisted. Ludovic, already shaped by the weight of public scrutiny and the shadow of his parents' fractured story, carried the invisible scars of his father's absence. Sheila said it plainly, without softening it. Ringo was an absent figure who caused his son tremendous damage. She grieved the fact that Ludovic never had the chance to confront his father, to ask for explanations or for reconciliation. That distance remained open and unresolved, adding one more layer to an already complex and painful family history. This is the part most people never hear about. July brought the day that broke her world in two, a date scorched into grief, the moment Sheila faced the loss of her only child. That evening, her son Ludovic Chancel died at the age of 34, following a severe health crisis caused by dangerous substance use. He had been found unconscious at his Paris apartment 2 days earlier and transported by emergency services to the Georges Pompidou Hospital. Despite the efforts of medical teams working to save him, Ludovic never regained consciousness. Sheila, powerless, was present for the final hours of her beloved son's life. Ludovic's troubles had begun in 2002, following a painful breakup with Rosa, a woman Sheila described with warmth as a wonderful little woman. The relationship's end marked the beginning of a long descent. Weighed down by personal wounds and the pressure of being born to an icon, Ludovic lost himself in destructive patterns that grew harder and harder to escape. For 15 years, Sheila mobilized every resource she had. She funded rehabilitation programs, opened her home to him, worked constantly to pull him away from harmful influences. There were periods of recovery, moments of peace and stability that let her breathe, but the depth of his personal pain always made the ground uncertain beneath him. She never stopped fighting for him. She never gave up on the possibility that he might find his way through. The night he was found, an additional shock emerged, one that transformed grief into rage. Rather than call for help or attempt to assist Ludovic in that critical moment, someone present chose instead to photograph him in his final moments. That photograph would later surface in the media. The image of her son in distress, exposed rather than protected, displayed rather than dignified, wounded Sheila in a way that sat alongside the loss itself. There is a man on the ground, and instead of helping him, someone takes a photograph. "What kind of world are we living in?" she said. Determined to protect her son's dignity even in death, she pursued legal action to recover and destroy the image. A final act of maternal protection for a child she could no longer shield any other way. Behind closed doors, the story looked very different from the grief that the public was permitted to see. Despite everything, Sheila spoke of Ludovic only with unconditional love. She acknowledged his struggles, but she also described his kindness, his charm, his overflowing imagination. He was nothing but love and intensity, she said. He was someone who longed for the light, even when life kept pulling him toward the dark. After his death, she chose to keep performing. Music became the lifeline that kept her above the surface of an otherwise unsurvivable grief. Some critics questioned the speed of her return to the stage, but her answer was simple and complete. Stopping would have meant surrendering to despair. Singing was how she honored him. It was how she stayed alive. "If you want me to die, then yes. We stop everything. But if you want me to live, we don't stop," she said. Words born from a mother's pain, but also from something unbreakable at her core. Today, Sheila finds comfort in the belief that Ludovic remains close in spirit. His resting place is beside his grandparents in Louvre, in the burial plot that Sheila had once imagined for herself. That space now holds what she calls the greatest treasure of her life, a son she still describes as the most beautiful thing I ever had. The truth of Sheila, finally laid bare, is not the story of a pop star. It is the story of a survivor. Today, at the end of her 70s, Sheila lives a life she has built on her own terms, balancing solitude, artistic passion, and a hard-won inner peace. Far from retreating into obscurity, she remains fully engaged in her work and with the people who have followed her for decades. After more than 60 years on stage, she continues to embrace music as both medicine and connection. Her studio album, À l'Avenir, released in April, is proof of that undiminished creative energy. The project was not merely a return to the recording studio. It was an act of resilience. Introspective lyrics set against vibrant sounds tell both her history and her hopes. In interviews, she described the album as simultaneously a work of memory and a declaration of defiance, a tribute to everything she has survived, and a promise to herself and her supporters that suffering would not define her final chapters. The release was followed by the announcement of a national tour called 8.0, a title chosen to reflect both the milestone of her age and her absolute refusal to slow down. Even as time leaves its marks, Sheila moves forward with grace, determined to keep sharing her voice for as long as it can bring comfort or joy to someone who needs it. Her daily life now is defined by a chosen simplicity. She divides her time between her Parisian apartment and peaceful retreats in the countryside, where she finds a grounding in nature that fame never offered her. Gardening has become a genuine passion, tending to her plants, watching them grow, finding in that patient, quiet work a small but meaningful remedy for the losses she has endured. Her inner circle is small, but the friendships within it are deep and lasting. She remains close to artists like Françoise Hardy, bound together by a shared history no outsider can fully understand. Unlike the relentless whirlwind of her early years, studios, media obligations, promotional appearances she had no power to refuse. Sheila now sets her own pace. She chooses her public appearances carefully, favoring projects that carry real meaning over the noise of current events. In recent years, she has turned her thoughts seriously toward legacy. she has expressed a clear desire to write her memoirs, a project she considers essential. For too long, she says, others have shaped her narrative. Journalists, former producers, self-proclaimed friends. Now she wants the final word to belong to her. She has hinted that the account will be unflinching, an honest look at the triumphs, the betrayals, the joys, and the tragedies that made her who she is. No one can tell my story in my place, she said in a moment of unguarded candor. She is not in a hurry. She will write it at her own pace, on her own terms. Despite the suffering she has carried, Sheila continues to support causes close to her heart. In the aftermath of Ludovic's death, she quietly began backing organizations that assist families navigating emotional and behavioral crises, hoping that her experience might help prevent other families from walking the same path. She does this without seeking recognition, driven by a profound understanding of how alone those battles can feel. Above all, she remains deeply connected to her audience. She still receives letters from fans who have followed her journey for decades, many of them seeing in her a symbol of endurance that transcends music. In their words, she finds the strength to keep going, to keep sharing, to keep standing. For Sheila, the stage is no longer about applause or awards or validation. It is an act of survival. It is meaning carved from loss. It is a tribute to everyone she has loved and everyone she has lost. The market girl from Créteil, who sang to strangers for spare change while her father sold candy, became one of France's most enduring voices. Not because she was the most polished, not because she was the most protected, but because she kept singing through every single thing that tried to silence her. That is the real story of Sheila, and it took 79 years for the world to finally hear it. Which Sheila song holds the strongest memories for you? Share it in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of extraordinary people.